Live from London, this is BBC News. President Putin thanks Russian troops at the Kremlin, saying they stopped a civil war and last weekend's Wagner Group mutiny. Moscow says the mercenaries are to be disarmed but will escape prosecution over their rebellion. President Zelensky says his forces' counter-offensive is making gains on all fronts.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. An audio recording from 2021 appears to show President Trump discussing what he calls highly confidential secret documents. And a damning report finds racism, elitism and misogyny are widespread and deep-rooted in English and Welsh cricket. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to BBC News Now, 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. Let's take you straight to what has been happening in Russia. Breaking news from there. President Putin has been speaking about last weekend's aborted mutiny by Wagner Group mercenaries. He thanked the troops and also members of the SFB security services for their performance during the rebellion, and he told them that you've essentially stopped a civil war. You acted properly and in a coordinated manner. Mr. Putin also acknowledging the death of a number of pilots who were killed in the mutiny. He was joined at the event, and this is significant, in the Kremlin by the Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu, whose dismissal the Wagner fighters had demanded. Lots to unpick here. Let's take you straight to our Eastern Europe correspondent, Sarah Rainsford, who joins us now. Sarah, good to see you. Firstly, how unusual is it that we would see President Putin giving an address to the security services like this? Stay with us. You're watching BBC News. BBC. You're live with BBC News. An audio recording has emerged of Donald Trump allegedly riffling through some papers, ruffling them, saying that they're highly classified, he said, during a post-presidential interview. During an interview with an author working on a memoir of his former Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, Mr. Trump is heard going through the papers and saying this is highly confidential. Earlier this month, he appeared at a federal court in Miami, charged with 37 counts of illegally retaining classified documents and obstructing the government's efforts to get them back. He has denied the charges. We can have a small listen to the audio recording obtained by CNN. We have to leave it there, but so well done, and congratulations from us all. The extraordinary Jamie Munro speaking to me there, just with that amazing Jamie Aarons, who climbed Scotland's Munros in 31 days and 10 hours. This is BBC News, the headlines. President Putin thanks Russian troops at the Kremlin, saying they stopped a civil war in last weekend's Wagner Group mutiny. Moscow says Wagner is to be disarmed. We ask what next for African governments who have grown increasingly reliant on the mercenaries. The Central Bank of Pakistan raises interest rates to 22% in a bid to curb soaring inflation. And a BBC investigation finds new cases of transplant tourism referred to authorities after the UK's first organ trafficking plot was exposed earlier this year. Let's now, though, pick up on that news from Russia, where President Putin has been thanking troops for their performance in last weekend's aborted mutiny. Moscow says preparations are underway for the Wagner Group mercenaries to hand over their heavy weapons. They won't face prosecution. Russia's FSB security services saying the criminal case against them has been dropped. Let's talk to Matthew Sussex, who is at the Australian Defence College and joins us now. Matthew, good to see you. Firstly, let's talk about President Putin's address to the security forces first. That's lovely to hear. Kavitha, thank you so much for joining us. Do stay with us. You're watching BBC News. Let's take you to Pakistan now, because the central bank has raised the interest rate to 22% with the intention to curb soaring inflation. According to some analysts, the decision is in line with the demands of the International Monetary Fund. It may help to secure a stalled tranche of more than $1 billion of a bailout program that expires on June the 30th. It's always incredible to see these live pictures. They floor me every time. This is Mecca live right now. Huge numbers of pilgrims have gathered at Islam's holiest site. It is the start of the annual Hajj, and it's being held without COVID restrictions for the first time since 2019. The third day of the pilgrimage, more than 2 million people from 160 countries are likely to take part. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims are undertaking the first ritual of the event, walking around the Kaaba. That's the shrine at the heart of Mecca's Great Mosque. To remind you, all Muslims are expected to undertake the Hajj at least once in their lives. And you can see a man there holding an umbrella. It is incredibly hot there right now. Temperatures expected to reach about 45 degrees. And we've been hearing from Saudi authorities the huge number of medics, ambulances, cooling stations as well that are in place just to try and make sure that people can conduct their pilgrimage safely. So incredible pictures as always from Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Huge numbers of pilgrims gathering for the start of the Hajj. Live from London, this is BBC News. President Putin thanks Russian troops at the Kremlin, saying they stopped a civil war in last weekend's Wagner Group mutiny. An audio recording emerges of Donald Trump appearing to acknowledge handling highly classified papers. And a damning report finds racism, elitism and misogyny are widespread and deep-rooted in English and Welsh cricket. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to BBC News Now. 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. Let's update you on what is happening on the ground in Ukraine right now. Kyiv saying its counter-offensive against Russian forces had made advances on all fronts. We've seen President Zelensky handing out medals to soldiers who have been fighting in Bakhmut in the east of the country. Pro-Russian commentators say Ukrainian troops have crossed the Dnipro River and retaken a village near Kherson in the south. Live to Kyiv, let's join our correspondent there, Maini Jones. Maini, firstly, what is being said about the counter-offensive? What's the latest on the ground? Amir Nada reporting there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
BBC News, bringing you different stories from across the UK. For more stories from across the UK, head to the BBC News website.
Good to have you with us on BBC News. Let's bring you right up to date with what has been happening in Russia, Moscow particularly. We've seen President Putin appear at the Kremlin this morning. He was thanking troops from the Army, Interior Ministry, FSB and National Guard, saying they had stopped a civil war in Russia. But then after that, we got these pictures. Now, they're not live. They've just been fed to us in the past few minutes or so. You can see President Putin addressing a number of people in a rather ornate room, saying that the Wagner Group was entirely supported by the state. Quickly, time to take you to New Zealand because it's one of the most well-read stories on our website today. This is the kiwi, New Zealand's flightless national bird. It's facing a conservation crisis due to various threats, but particularly because of rats. So to safeguard its population, New Zealand is implementing extensive rat eradication programs in key kiwi habitats. If you go to the website and click onto the story, you can read all about it, exactly what they're doing, how volunteers in Wellington, the capital, are on a mission to eradicate the last few rats remaining on one key peninsula. But the goal is to wipe out every last rat in New Zealand. Stay with us. This is BBC News, the headlines. President Putin thanks Russian troops at the Kremlin, saying they stopped a civil war in last weekend's Wagner Group mutiny. The BBC investigation finds new cases of transplant tourism referred to the authorities after the UK's first organ trafficking plot was exposed earlier this year. And a painting which possibly depicts an ancestor of the pizza is discovered in Pompeii. Let's pick up now on that news from Russia, where President Putin has been speaking again about the aborted mutiny by Wagner Group mercenaries. He said that Wagner was paid 86 billion rubles, or $1 billion, by the Russian state, and that officials will now investigate how the money was spent by the group and its founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Earlier, he thanked Russian troops and members of the SFB security service for their performance during the mutiny. Now, Mr. Putin told them, "You have essentially stopped a civil war. You acted properly and in a coordinated manner." And you can listen to Mark's investigation, BBC File on 4, The Organ Harvester, on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with BBC News. The former CEO of Audi, Rupert Stadler, has been convicted of fraud by negligence and handed a suspended sentence of 1 year and 9 months over his role in the so-called Dieselgate scandal. He's the highest-ranking former executive to be punished over emissions cheating in the car industry. Our Berlin correspondent Damien McGuinness has more on the background to the case. A still life fresco depicting a possible ancestor of the pizza has been found on the wall of a house in Pompeii, the ancient Roman city wiped out by an eruption of volcano Mount Vesuvius 2,000 years ago. The fresco was found in the atrium of a house with a bakery attached to it. It can't be pizza as we know it though, as 2,000 years ago tomatoes and mozzarella, the basic ingredients of the pizza, were unknown. But nonetheless, beautiful pictures. Anna, the fresco at Pompeii. Live from London, this is BBC News. President Putin thanks Russian troops at the Kremlin, saying they stopped a civil war in last weekend's Wagner Group mutiny. The BBC uncovers new links between Syria's regime and trade in the powerful amphetamine Captagon. A damning report finds racism, elitism and misogyny are widespread and deep-rooted in English and Welsh cricket. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to BBC News Now. 3 hours of fast-moving news, interviews and reaction. We're going to start in Russia, where President Putin has said the authorities will now investigate how money paid to Wagner Group mercenaries was spent. Earlier, he thanked his security forces for their performance during the mutiny last weekend, saying that they had stopped a civil war. Mr. Putin told troops gathered in the Kremlin that they'd stood up to turmoil which would have led to chaos. He held a minute's silence for pilots killed during the mutiny. The authorities, though, have confirmed that a criminal case against Wagner has been dropped. The Defence Ministry says the group will have to hand over their heavy weapons and also their equipment. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg gave me his assessment of Mr. Putin's latest comments. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's take a look now at some of the other stories making news here in the UK. The government says it cost an estimated £63,000 more to send a migrant to a country like Rwanda than to keep them in the UK. The figure comes from an economic impact assessment of the illegal migration bill, which is going through Parliament. It finds the total cost of relocating an individual is about £169,000. Supermarket executives are being grilled by MPs over why food prices are still rising as some wholesale costs are falling. A parliamentary committee is examining the cost of the weekly shop, with the UK's biggest grocers, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda and Morrisons, set to appear. And parents are still being forced to spend hundreds of pounds on school uniforms, despite rules meant to lower the costs. The Children's Society claims parents spend on average £422 a year on secondary and £287 on primary uniforms. Under changes to the Education Act last year, schools in England are meant to be helping cut costs for parents. You're live with BBC News. Strike action by nurses at the Royal College of Nursing will not continue after the union's ballot of its members in England failed to achieve a mandate. While the majority of members voted to continue to take industrial action, the numbers taking part in the vote were too low for it to count. Speaking earlier today, the Junior Health Minister, Maria Caulfield, said she welcomed the news and was pleased that the government's previous pay offer would soon come into effect. Also time to show you incredible shots, and they always are, of Mecca. Huge numbers of pilgrims gathering at Islam's holiest site. It's the start of the annual Hajj. It's hot there, 45 degrees, but everyone being kept cool by the authorities.
Your favourite radio show is now available on BBC News. So join me, Nikki Campbell, for the nation's phone-in, talking about the big topics of the day, giving you a voice. No judgment, just honesty. Nikki Campbell, weekdays at 9 on BBC News. Watch on iPlayer.
China's premier warns Western countries not to rein in their trade and business ties with China, calling for greater cooperation instead. And the former boss of Audi admits to fraud in the Dieselgate scandal, but avoids jail time. Hello to you, welcome along. This is World Business Report. I'm Ben Thompson, and we're going to start this hour in China, where the Premier Li Keqiang used a speech at the World Economic Forum to attack attempts by Western countries to reduce their involvement with China. Addressing the so-called Summer Davos conference in the northern Chinese city of Tianjin, he said that the concept of de-risking was a false proposition, given the scale of economic globalisation. He instead called for increased cooperation. Well, the United States and the European Union, they've been trying to reduce their reliance on what is the world's second largest economy. Let's talk now to Mark Williams, who's Chief Asia Economist at Capital Economics. Mark, good to have you with us. Why are they so concerned? The Chinese economy has been the powerhouse economy, but they are a little nervous about Europe and the US saying, hang on, we want to reduce our reliance on what you do. Samira, really good to see you. Thank you. Samira saying that live in New York. Quickly, time to show you European markets are not those. Those are not the market numbers. We'll try and show you a little later. You're up to date. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
I want to talk to you about the politics of this. Did she not think she was going to get that question?
It's important to remember that this is a negotiation.
It's a good photo of.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
There is always an email. We are so insignificant in this cosmos. Do you want some facts on baguettes? I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is The Context.
The Context, tonight from 8 p.m. on BBC News and iPlayer.
You're live with BBC News. It's time for a look at today's sport. Let's join Hugh.
Lucy, hello to you. English cricket has been accused of widespread racism, sexism, classism and elitism by a long-awaited and damning report. A 2-year investigation set up in the wake of global movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too makes 44 recommendations to change what the chair of the commission... And that, Lucy, is all your sport for now.
Hugh, thank you so much. Let's bring you up to date with some breaking news from here in the UK. An inquest into the death of a woman whose disappearance prompted a massive search. This was back in January, at the end of January, and generated huge interest up and down the country, around the world as well, has just delivered a verdict. I'm talking about Nicola Bulley. Now, her death, we have just found out, has been recorded as accidental. This has come to us from Dr. James Adderley, who is the senior coroner for Lancashire. To remind you, back in January, Nicola Bulley disappeared. She was out walking her dog, a Springer Spaniel called Willow, in Lancashire shortly after finishing a work conference call. There was a search. You can see pictures from the scene here along the river, and a statement by the local police force, who classified her as a high-risk person. And what happened then was widespread speculation in all of the media, right across the country. There was a lot of speculation about her whereabouts and a huge amount of concern as well. Danny, thank you so much, and we will return to the Crown Court when that indeed happens. But to remind you, the coroner has concluded that Nicola Bulley fell into the River Wire and died almost immediately.
Hello there. We had one or two lovely sunrise pictures sent to us earlier.